Jake Barraclough is a British YouTuber who has moved to Japan to pursue the marathon monk dream. He's known for his train harder, not smarter approach, which some of the best Japanese runners have been executing for several decades now. His training involves running 250k weeks, and he has plans to increase it to 300 kilometers in the near future. But the question arises, as a running coach, what are my thoughts on this? Okay, so the first thing I thought we'd quickly touch on is he's a super nice guy and I really appreciate what he's doing for the running community. It's so refreshing to see some good content that's really entertaining every Sunday. We all know everyone looks forward to Sunday evening to have a nice watch of some Ran to Japan content. Obviously, I think in the UK it's probably going to be at lunch or something. Anyhow, on top of that, he is probably the nicest elite runner that I've ever met. Like, he's super down to earth. I think people definitely want to see running content in Japan from like an elite marathoner like you, so
don't know about elite.
And every time I've helped him with videos, he's like really appreciated it and all that. And I think this is a testament as to how quickly he's grown on YouTube. He's just, yeah, an overall good guy. So shout out to him and thank you for letting me analyze your training today for a video. And I think it's also important to remember that Jake does make it pretty clear in a lot of his videos that, you know, his training is pretty absurd and insane.
If you want to really improve, get better, then you got to take those risks. You got to take a gamble, which has been fully my philosophy. And it's not the safest option. I'm not going to go and recommend it, but if you want to test yourself and really find out how good you can possibly be, like what your limit is, then you're going to have to push the mileage, push the intensity, and run through those kind of aches and pains. As long as I stay on top of the sleep, the fueling, the kind of stretching, S&C, all of that stuff, I can usually get over a little niggle in a few days.
And he makes it clear that this training isn't necessarily for everyone, but if you want to get to your absolute potential and get every little edge possible, then you do have to add a little bit of risk. And I think that's the main point that he's trying to make with these 250k weeks, train harder, not smarter principle. So it's important to note that Jake isn't just doing random 250k weeks, it's quite structured. I don't know if people remember, but he actually came on my channel once and talked about how he keeps track of his intensity distribution, so how much of his mileage is easy, tempo, and fast. And I think that's a good way to stay in check.
I've got an Excel spreadsheet just with I'm keeping it old school, proper old school. I use it like a training diary to like plan what's coming up, but then also I can look back 6 months ago and see when I was running my best. And also I track every week the percentage of easy running to steady running to hard running and try and get like a pyramid. So it's like, well, 60% easy, 30% steady, 10% hard, something like that. And try and keep that week on week. So it's like if I suddenly see, I've hit like 40% hard running this week, it's like, that's asking for an injury or like a burnout.
So another thing that's worth mentioning is that he does about 17 to 21 hours of running a week, and that doesn't include all the S&C, plyometrics, recovery, and eating and all that happens in between the runs. A whopping 59% of you are still not subscribed. Make sure you leave a like and comment as well to support the channel.
Yeah, I need like 8 minimum. Just when I'm running that much, I really feel it. Like if I get less than 8, I'm pretty much ruined. So I put a big emphasis on just like maximizing sleep and all the fueling, so like constantly eating throughout the day. For me, that's the best bit. I've got a ferocious appetite, so it's easy to like constantly be snacking and stuff and just making sure I'm getting like close to 5,000 calories in. Because these just look the same, but then...
Yeah, tell me the difference. I'm curious.
The secret in its popularity is that it's piping hot. You gotta love that description.
Typical Japanese
not helped at all.
Yeah. So I think what I'm trying to say is that it's fairly controlled and there's a method to the madness, let's say. So before we answer whether the train harder, not smarter scenario is good or bad, we have to look at the context a little more. And that's your context. So are you in the situation where you're able to do all these miles? Because for Jake, it actually does make a fair amount of sense to do it because of his lifestyle. He doesn't have a 9-to-5 job Monday to Friday. He has all the time in the world to do all the recovery. And he's dedicated his life to the sport. He calls himself a marathon monk, and he pretty much is. And I think in his context, it really makes a lot of sense. But you need to ask yourself, does it make sense for your training and your scenario and your lifestyle? So that's kind of what we're going to explore in this video. So this leads me on perfectly to the first point, which is the law of diminishing returns. So we've heard this term being used a lot in many different contexts, and it applies to running and mileage just as much. So we know that, going from like a 30k week to 50k week, that can give you some good benefits. 50k week to 80k week, again, really good benefits. But eventually that graph is going to plateau off. And obviously that extra 20-30 kilometers a week is going to give you way less extra marginal gain compared to the first few extra mileage that you get from like a lower mileage to a medium mileage. So as you get to the higher mileage, you're essentially putting your body at slightly more risk in the hopes of getting that slight extra marginal gain. And for someone like Jake that's run a 2:14 marathon and wants to get that every little bit of improvement, it makes sense for him to do those huge volumes to try and get the most out of himself. But for a runner that doesn't have much experience running 80k weeks, 90k weeks, 100k weeks, it doesn't make any sense to just, jump straight up to 250k weeks and even skipping straight to 160k weeks. So I've been running for several years, as you guys know by now, and I've done plenty of 100 to 120k weeks in the past. I've probably done hundreds of weeks at that volume by now, and I'm only just starting to consider bumping that up by a tiny bit to like 130, 140k a week to see how my body responds to that. But it just goes to show that it's a long process, and I've plateaued for like 2 years now in the 5k, 10k half marathon and all that. So I think it is a sensible decision for me to, finally move on from the mileage that I'm kind of used to, 100 to 120k's, and bump it up and see how my body responds to that. So it is a bit of a longer process than you think. You don't want to just jump up really quickly. Again, there is a caveat to this though, and if your body is super resilient and can handle the stress on the ligaments, tendons, bones, and muscles, I don't see why you can't experiment with it. But at the same time, it depends on whether you're looking at short to medium term gains or if you're looking at long term. When you look at long term, I think the goal should always be to get the fittest possible with the least amount of training. And Zach Daniels talks about this in his book, I think. And it's essentially leaving a bit more potential in the future if you can run a certain time with minimal training possible. So this is what I mean by whether you're looking at short to medium term gains or long term gains. Because if we're looking super long term, then yes, we want to maximize the fitness that we can get from a certain mileage before we move on. But going back to Jake's scenario though, I'm not saying he's ruining his long term potential, because everyone has different individual variances, and he probably has next level resistance to injury. And also we know that because he's not locked into a 9-to-5 job, he's flexible and he can spend a lot more time focusing on recovery. Eating enough when you're running that much mileage is huge. And also he uses those recovery boots, he uses the massage gun, he's actually doing the strength and the plyometrics, which even I'm not doing plyometrics right now, and I probably should if I want to make sure that the tendons can handle that elastic springiness. So I should probably get into plyometrics if I want to increase my mileage a little bit as well. So while I still acknowledge that training harder and not smarter has gotten Jake some huge gains, I also want to highlight the fact that there is a little bit of a component of innate talent of not getting injured involved. Although I want to say that it's a combination of innate talent and also the hard work ethic that he puts in terms of recovery to make sure he doesn't get injured. The reason why I want to highlight this is I am confident that a lot of other people put a lot of effort into their recovery, and obviously it's an outlier to be able to run 250k weeks. But then if you watch Tempo Japan's video of Jake recovering in between runs, you can tell that he puts so much thought into that. So you can also see why he's an outlier. So I'm hoping I come across as neutral as possible, but that's my genuine opinion.
I'd say everything that I can control, I say pretty much, I like to think I live like a pro just without getting paid. Basically, apart from that, it's pretty much the pro lifestyle.
The one other thing I want to acknowledge though is that I truly believe that he comes from a slow twitch fiber background, and in terms of that, he's definitely worked so hard to get to like a sub 30 10k and all the PBs that he currently has. But again, in Jake's scenario, it makes sense to do a lot of mileage because remember, the marathon is very, very aerobic. I would say it's 99% aerobic. So we want to maximize our aerobic base as much as possible. And again, in his scenario, it makes a lot of sense because he has everything covered. He's training really well. So in order to get that marginal gain, he has to now look at stuff like increasing his mileage, even though the risk to, marginal gain ratio is not the best when you're at 250k weeks. So let's try and wrap up this video and kind of gather my thoughts on where I'm sitting in terms of this. Now, I'm super grateful that Jake has come onto the YouTube scene to, share his approach and also challenge societal norms. We live in a world where a lot of brands and influencers are saying train smarter, follow the 10% rule, stick to zone 2, and also they obsess over metrics a lot, almost overcomplicate things. But Jake flips that on its head and goes for the more simple approach of just simply running more and becoming better as a result of that. And I think there is a lot of value to be gained from that simple mindset as well. How I can implement this to my personal running journey is that because I have had a pretty stagnant running progress over the last couple of years, not really improving much, but also not doing anything extra in my training to warrant that improvement, I think it is time for me to actually consider training harder. Just as a really important disclaimer though, if you are experiencing a running plateau and you can't really explain why and you just don't know what's happening, I think it is worth checking your bloods. I recently did this because I had low iron 2 years ago and it looks like my iron has improved a little bit. It's not great yet, but it's definitely higher than it was 2 years ago at least, so I think I have the all clear to try and train harder. And I think without seeing Jake's videos every Sunday, running a lot and inspiring me to do higher mileage, I wouldn't have ever thought of like diverting from my mindset. So as a guy that has not improved for a while, I think it really makes sense to actually train harder. I think if you are still improving with the same amount of mileage, you don't have to necessarily rush into more mileage. In that scenario, I think it's better to focus on recovery and try and milk as much performance out of that mileage before you start increasing your volume even more and getting even more performance gains. It comes down to you. If it applies to you, if you haven't improved in a while, it is worth experimenting, adding a bit more stimulus to the body, having your body have to adapt to that stimulus and therefore become a better runner. Now to an extent, I think Jake still trains hard and also smart, but we all know that train hard and not smarter sounds a lot more controversial. It's gonna have more reception in the comments, and it definitely does sound like a funny thing to say, and I totally understand why he says that. I'm sure he knows this in his head, surely. I don't know. He can comment below and tell me. But anyway, that's enough blabbering. Leave a like, comment below, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see my running journey. And the way I'm gonna try and break through this plateau is by training harder and not smarter.